Good afternoon, everybody. We've got quite a crowd in here, as you can see today. Right, welcome to the Resources and Corporate Business Overview and Scrutiny Committee. First item on the agenda, those present and apologies. We weren't expecting any apologies, but certainly...
Apologies from Councillor Giles Davis.
Right, thank you. And
could I add my apologies in that I will have to leave at 2:45 to go to an emergency meeting elsewhere.
Right, thank you, Mary. The other thing is, like I've got here, phones, if you could put them on silent running, please, or switch them off if you've got that, feels better. Thank you. Right, thank you there. And item number 2 is over to yourself over there on declarations of interest. I think there's only one person on this one.
Thank you, Chair. There are just a couple of interests. The first is in relation to the Green Meadow Community Farm report. I understand, Councillor Ashley, that you're on the shadow board of the Green Meadow Community Farm. That's the personal interest only, so it's just to confirm that. With regard to the members' small schemes, members will be aware that those who have proposed small schemes will have a personal and a prejudicial interest in relation to these items, but as you've been granted a dispensation by the Ethics and Standards Committee, you can remain when these are being discussed. So my understanding that the councillors concerned are Councillors Hugh Bevan, Stuart Ashley, Nigel Davis and Councillor Philip Seaborn. Is that correct? Just to confirm. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And as always, you can remain if you want. And always, if any items come up that members think they should declare, please let me know.
Could I ask Adele just to repeat that, please?
Yes, it's in relation to the small schemes. There's a list here of members who proposed small schemes, and I think you're on the list of one of the members who's proposed, but it's not a prejudicial interest because of the dispensation. So, thank you.
I think, Chair, what it is though a number of us who contributed towards the to the bollards at the memorial gates. On page 64.
We'll come to that when we come to it. Thank you there. Okay. Item number 3. I've been pointed out minutes of last meeting, so if we go on to that on page number 3, just look through for accuracy, page number 3, page number 4, page number 5, page number 6 and page number 7. So we'd like to...
I'd like to move those to record, Chair.
Thank you, Seconder. Thank you, Hugh. Right, go back through, just having a look, has anybody got anything they want to bring up? Page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6 and page 7. Forever hold your peace, I'm not going to bring anything. Okay, on to the next item. Go over the Welsh bit. And item number 4, action sheet. Over to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Members, you did receive the recommendations, the responses from the last meeting last Thursday. If anyone's got any questions on those, if not, I have nothing else to add.
Thank you, Nigel. Lovely, thank you. Okay, on to the item this afternoon, which we're all here for. Item number 5, Green Meadow Community Farm. I'd like to thank you all for coming yesterday and having a look round. It seemed like you all rather enjoyed yourself, and thank you for Sally for making us feel most welcome there, and Stuart for having talked with as well. Which leads me on to yourselves. Today, I was going to introduce everybody, but I'll just say a couple of words about the, what we're doing this afternoon, which is obviously scrutinising what's on the report, and obviously for everybody out there that the community farm means a lot to people in the borough. I'm well aware of what's been going on outside of this meeting, and we look forward to your our deliberations and your witness on this. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, start with Dave, because he probably get a report of this. If you'd like to then go around the table and introduce yourselves and your positions, please.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So Dave Congreve, in charge of community services, which include the farm in the portfolio at the moment. So that's me.
I'm Sally Partridge. I'm the director at Green Meadow Community Farm.
Stuart Lawrence, I'm the Sports Development Manager with additional responsibilities, one of which is the farm.
I'm Dave Weaver from Financial Services, and I support Dave Congreve in his budget and financial matters.
I'm Katie Stevenson. I'm the Chief Executive of Groundwork Wales.
Can I just add, Chair, as well, in terms of Katie's role this afternoon? So Katie's here to answer any questions you may have about a specific part of the report, which is that bit that relates to the community asset transfer, rather than the more generalised content of the report, which is around how the Council might consider the future of the farm. Yeah.
And back over to you, Dave, for presenting this.
Okay, right, thank you. So in terms of, I think hopefully that's introductions, so we've got a fairly good spread, I think, of officers with us. One of the things that Stuart mentioned is that he has a wider set of responsibilities, so that should we decide to proceed with any changes at the farm, Stuart will be helping Sally at a more strategic level to implement those, sort of project managing any change process that we go through down there. Okay, so what I intend to do is assume that you've all read the report, which I know will be the case. Probably just spend 2 minutes pulling out what I see as some of the key messages, and then really sort of handing over to you, Chair, to take any questions or provide any clarification on some of the things that are of particular interest. So if we start with why we're here, really, and I think it's worth just rehearsing that actually the reason that we are looking particularly at the farm at this point in time relates to the 2-year budget process that US members put in train, in which we had scrutiny in November, I think it was 2015, and through that meeting, the general sentiment that was expressed was because of the financial pressures facing the Council overall, there were some service changes that you felt we could go harder and faster at, and one of those was the farm. When that was considered then in relation to that scrutiny process, that was agreed by the Executive, so it set us the challenge then as officers about thinking how can we reduce more of the subsidy at the farm more quickly than was going to be the case in terms of our proposals at that point. So that manifests itself in an approved savings targets for a real terms reduction of 35k both in the year that we're in now and in next year. So those are agreed, that is council policy, and that is in addition to us absorbing cost pressures at the farm. So every time there's an increment for a member of staff, that's not funded, that is absorbed in addition to those reducing subsidies. You'll be aware, I think, from yesterday's Cabinet discussion that there is no medium-term service and financial plan approved yet beyond 17-18, but that we as officers and chief officers have been asked to indicate directions of travel so that if the medium-term service and financial plan looks broadly similar in terms of its outlook for perhaps the 3 to 5 years after 17-18, where is it that we would see us making those changes? Where is it that we could help the Council balance its budget overall? And clearly, from our point of view within there, the farm has to be part of our consideration simply because there are very few other viable alternatives that don't impact, in our view at this stage, but this is clearly your territory, they don't impact even more on your corporate plan priorities going forward. So the direction of travel for the farm beyond 17-18 isn't approved, but it is assumed to be more of the same at the sort of level, and when we come to the figures in a bit of detail, we can tell you as to how we think we can actually make potentially more savings at the farm and potentially over a longer period of time. Right, so that's where we're at the moment. Within those, I think, I suppose the key thing from our point of view is to summarise that to sort of say we see the outlook for the farm being one of increasing revenue difficulty. And we couple that with the fact that at the moment US members only have one priority, only have one set of approvals in terms of capital investment, and that's around your 21st Century Schools programme. So there's very, very little likelihood that you're going to turn around to me and say, well, I tell you what, Dave, all of those problems at the farm in terms of the capital investment, the capital overdue, repairs and maintenance that are needed down there, we're going to suddenly fund those as a council. So we've assumed that not only is the revenue position going to get much worse, but potentially the capital investment needs are going to get much tighter as well. And it's when you put those two features together, which I don't think is unreasonable given the outlook that we've just talked about, that actually you start to think the farm is fairly unsustainable in its current form. And therefore the executive member who's in charge of the farm was very clear about sort of saying, okay, well, we can look at a whole range of options, but actually we consider that there are significant benefits that come to the local community through operating the farm. So whilst it would be quite right and proper to look at a whole range of options that may see disposal, that may see closure, that may see reducing the offer down at the farm in different ways, The working assumption that's in front of you at the moment is that you two share those benefits in terms of the outputs from the farm and the value to the local community, and that equally you want to see a future for the farm for the next 50 years. That's really what your part of the discussion is for this afternoon. If that isn't something that's validated, if it is the case from the committee's perspective that actually you want to see, on behalf of the wider council, closure or bigger change at the farm, then this is the opportunity to say that. Because once we move beyond this point, I think we've got as officers a very clear brief to say, actually, this is what we're going to be doing in terms of changing the farm to secure the policy objectives of the council. Okay, so that's where we've got to. So today is quite important from that point of view. I think it's worth us just sort of saying this well by way of introduction. There are lots of matters of detail that are hinted at that we won't have all the information to. So should we decide collectively at the end of this that we go forward to the next stage of work, which is looking in more detail at one of these models in particular, then it'll only be as we do that work that we're able to give you the fine detail about actually is that exactly how much that's going to save, exactly how detailed a piece of work do we need to do on things like land title and so on. So there's lots of matters of detail that will need to be resolved as the next stage of work. We'll try and address some of those today if they come up, but bear with us if we haven't got all the answers to the detailed questions. So I think the only other thing I think we would say is that, and I think I've hinted at it with Katie's presence, is that as part of our look at some of those alternatives, we formed a view very clearly that actually a model that you're very familiar with, you've put your leisure services into a charitable trust, you're familiar with all sorts of other charitable organisations that run museums, galleries, art galleries, and I'm trying to think, theatre is the other one, are all variants of that kind of model. So there is lots of experience in Torvine of constituting this type of and setting up this type of model. So as we went through that, and we appreciated that, one of the ways that we may, and it is very speculative at this stage, be able to add even more value to that, which is reflected in some of the figures, is to work with organisations who can help us possibly secure community asset transfer funding. And our community asset transfer funding is very specific, it's very time limited, so we've had to sort of do things a little bit out of sequence. But it does mean that if we're able to secure it, it could add an awful lot of financial benefit to the farm in terms of securing a future for it. No doubt we'll want to talk about that a little bit later on. But I think my advice to you in your scrutiny approach is to keep the issues separate. The CAT is kind of added value and it's the icing on the cake. We're talking about the cake itself, really. So if we, no doubt we'll want to look at the financial projections in some detail. I'm hoping that Dave will help me on some of that because the numbers will probably confound me. But I suppose the issues for us to just point out there before we get into the numbers is that they're not detailed projections. They are plausibly models on what could be achieved if we applied some of the best practice that's around, if we applied some of the industry standards, and if we applied some of the principles that we applied in leisure services to how the savings are generated. So we won't know the fine detail of those until we arrive at that point in time. But, in the same way that we looked at it in leisure services, at this point in time, that does look to be a very attractive way of protecting the farm's future. And I suppose the only other thing from my point of view is to conclude by sort of saying that was very much the kind of discussions that we've had with the staff, very much the kind of discussions that we've had with the Shadow Board, is to sort of say, actually, the farm's at a point in its time that it was at 50 years ago. 50 years ago, I think some really visionary thinking that went on by Cumbrian Community Council, or Cumbrian Newtown Corporation, as it was then, that wanted to secure a set of benefits for its population for a long period of time. That's essentially where we're at today. So we see this very much about the future generations, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and the opportunity to say, actually, whatever we do as a set of individual people, managers, members, councillors, we have the opportunity to create something that lasts at least for another 2 or 3 generations and offers the same kind of opportunities to local young people in particular. Right, I'll end my sort of opening address there, Chair, if you want. I think that's given you a hint at some of the things that I think we think are particularly important in the report, and I think probably the best thing to do is just open it up to questions, and we'll try and share those around and field those in the appropriate way.
Thank you very much, David. That's brilliant. And what I've got is 3 members at the pre-scrutiny here who've got a load of questions, not unsimilar to some of your themes, thankfully. We've got some backup questions if we need them, if they're not addressed. And members that weren't at pre-scrutiny, feel free to come in. You've also got these questions on here which you can parcel in as well. I'm not going to be directing you in that sense, but if I feel we're not getting stuff in, or you feel that we're not asking, we'll come back to visit some of those. I'm pretty certain we picked most of the themes up. The other thing I said from yesterday's visit round the farm, a lot of the themes that you addressing are quite apparent. So it was a really useful visit in that sense. So would you like to kick off, please?
You have mentioned, obviously, the fact that the 21st Century Schools Capital Programme does limit our ability to access funding. I want to ask whether you entered into any dialogue with Coleg Gwent, who will, to all intents and purposes, be taking over most of our sixth form provision in the not-too-distant future. Now, Coleg Gwent obviously has the Usk College there, and I wondered whether there'd be any consideration given to using the farm as an outreach for agricultural education, whether it's large animals, small animals. It's a college I know well because I had worked for Coleg Gwent for some considerable years, but no longer do so. And it seems to me that we could miss out on an ideal opportunity there to shape the 21st Century School Programme to at least enlarge some of the facilities at the farm. I don't think there's anyone sitting around this table that wouldn't, work tremendously hard to retain the farm as a considerable community, well-loved facility. But it seems to me we could have lost out on a lot there. I've got some other linked thoughts on that which I can give later, but I know the Chair has a list of people waiting to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The answer to that is no, we haven't at the moment, but it's not too late to have those conversations. My feeling is that actually, I think in terms of capital investment, Coleg Gwent and any other provider of post-16 education is probably going to face a number of the same sorts of constraints that we do. So its ability, even if it wanted to invest in there, may be limited, but we'll certainly explore that. And I think certainly the only other thing I would say is that we have quite good links with Coleg Gwent on the training front. I think the scale and size of those probably wouldn't be, even if we expanded them dramatically, sufficient to warrant a significant capital investment from Coleg Gwent. But I think, as I said right at the beginning, we've not closed down anything. We've got an opportunity to continue to explore those.
Well, I would look forward to hearing the results of some of that dialogue that you have. And I'm tended to disagree that we wouldn't have enough local students. I know many of our students, particularly in areas of multiple deprivation, would look to have training facilities on their doorstep to avoid the extra expense, etc., of travel, including adult students who often have to be home to pick up young children from school. And we've lost an excellent facility with, obviously, the Cullinan campus that used to offer special courses for adults. So this could bridge that gap as well.
Thanks, Mary. Hugh wanted to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's with regards to this whole thing about the finance. When elected members on all scrutiny committee meetings were invited to attend that workshop back in November 2015, we were asked to table or come up with ideas in conjunction with senior council officers to find a level of cuts to the extent of 10%, which was very much on a worst case scenario. At the time, we didn't know what the settlement was from Welsh Government, and in fact we've had two since then. We've had the final settlement March 2016, and we've had the interim settlement for this year already. So what concerned me was in the report it stated that there is no capital investment, and it's a policy decision that's been made by this council that there's no capital investment other than what's going into the 21st Century Schools Programme. I wasn't aware that any of us as elected members had voted on this council adopting that particular approach. That said, we did agree at the time because we were trying to find cuts on a sliding scale to go up to the worst case scenario. We weren't anticipating the full extent of those cuts to be implemented. We were anticipating the cuts to be brought in comparable to the level with the reductions in funding that we received, plus any inflationary costs. That said, as you rightly said, there were it was agreed cuts of 35,000 per annum for 2 years. So the question now is, why is it then that you consider the future of the farm in its current form to be unsustainable if these levels of costs of the 35,000 are achievable? Is it because you're adopting a longer term view and looking at the capital requirements of the farm going forwards?
I think it's both of those things, actually. I think it's in the sense that although, as we were saying at the beginning, we've only got an approved medium-term citizen financial plan for 17-18, and you quite rightly say, we don't know in detail what the next 3 to 4 years looks like. I think we're all I don't know your own view, certainly my view is, and the view I think that I share with a number of colleagues is, the type of reductions that we've seen, not in the year that's about to hit us, but in the years, perhaps 2 or 3 years ago, are more likely to be the norm, probably a little bit higher than those actually, over the next 5 or 6 years. So I think from our point of view, we don't see any easing of the revenue pressures down there. And 2 other things that I think you mentioned. One is that you said, right, well, okay, once we've achieved these 35k, well, actually, it's quite difficult for us to achieve the 35k. So if we assume that at the moment it's quite difficult to achieve that 35k and another 35k on the current operating model at the moment, and we're expecting more to come, then certainly it was the view that we hold that you need something a bit more radical. The only other thing I would add to that as well is that I think one of the benefits of this type of model, but it's for you to members to think it through, is that if we are able to achieve more than we would through managing these reductions sort of, in an incremental way on an annualised basis, if we are able to achieve more, then that clearly the benefit of that falls to the council. You've got more freedom and flexibility then to invest in other areas as well. So, certainly we are trying to take a longer-term perspective down there. I don't anticipate, I don't know whether Dave wants to comment further in terms of the sort of resources department's sense of it, but certainly we don't anticipate that there'll be any easing of the revenue pressures on local government going forward.
No, that's all we know at the moment. As Dave Lilly has said to Cabinet the last 2 occasions, really, at the moment the Minister for Public Services has said expect more of the same. So
that would be useful if you could outline the question. One of the things we did find with the report it's not obviously a simple document to read in a lot of ways in terms of equal. That was, if I have a criticism of it, was, a lot of us are used to looking at school governors and how reports various other things, and the income and expenditure side of it, in mind the fact that you obviously get cost centres and things. The current situation and how it might change is not on this in the way that probably some of us are used to interpreting in other forms. So actually what that financial pressure is and how it would form is difficult, I think, maybe for some members to understand. Could you outline what that is? Yes. Yeah, and I mean, obviously the pressures in terms of operating costs and capital, because that's the nub of this, isn't it?
I haven't got the figures on capital ready to hand. No. I don't know if, but certainly on the operating costs. The farm in its current operation, guys, is broadly spending approximately £700,000 a year and generating income of approximately £400,000 a year. Excuse me. Obviously, the most significant element of the operating costs is employees. So, if you said, right, we're not going to do anything more with the farm, we're just going to leave that run as it is. If we were able to do that, you'd be looking at between £15,000 and £20,000 every year, pay-related inflation, as well as perhaps any other inflation you may have on your sort of supplies and services costs. So, in the current arrangements, the farm would have to then generate additional income or cut back on staffing or whatever to absorb that £20,000 per annum. So that's very much the current outlook as existing policy stands.
What I was interested in, because obviously you've got staff, you've also got a considerable number of volunteers going through there. Without going into the next part of this, but it's obviously a consideration, you've also got the income going into the farm. How do you reflect that? Because obviously there's a cost to all of that and an income presumably generated from it as well. The prospects for the farm, it's its core business, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, all I was going to say, it's fairly straightforward to project the expenditure side of the equation, or rather, the income side is much more difficult depending on anticipating numbers through the door, etc. And I think I don't know if current management would agree with me, but I feel that the level of income that it's achieving now is probably at its highest extent. I think it would be very difficult to achieve any more substantial income. I mean, the figures in the report, but the income has risen from, just look at the figures in front of me, about £120,000 more income the farm has generated in its operating model in the last 3 to 4 years. So I think that's a compliment to the staff that they managed to do that. But to go further, I think, would be very challenging.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I wanted to pick up on that point because I think that's very important, actually. And the report mentions that they've managed to find cost savings of over £100,000 already, but I don't know who the third party was, but there seemed to be a third party report that was also included in the report from 2015 that did identify further opportunities for income generation, and in fact it even was critical of the farm to the extent that it said certain areas were underutilised and other areas were not utilised at all. It did outline a number of possible considerations, which were going down a garden centre type route, although it did say where that would physically located might be problematic. But there were a couple of other suggestions in there as well. So the question I wanted to ask was, whilst I know, except there's been focus on cost reductions, what further works have been done on maximising the revenue streams?
Okay, so if I just pick up on the report that you're alluding to, actually. So it is referenced in the report that we commissioned a review of the whole of the farm's estate, yeah? Partly so that you actually, as members, have the full set of choices in front of you. So included in there is the value of the farm, should you decide to say, tell you what, we want to move away from the farm, sell that and put that money in the bank to do something else. As members, that is entirely your prerogative. That's not an officer choice, so it'd be wrong for us not to offer you some information that enable you to think those things through. Included also in that review then were a couple of other things that we looked at and that were ruled out for reasons that I'll come to in a second, which included sort of saying, well, we could keep the farm, but we could just change its use to be a commercial let for a riding stable, for example. How much would that generate? And that figure is also in there. And then we also said to those same consultants who were land use and farm specialist consultants, what else do you think? And some of the other things that they thought were, actually, yeah, we can see some problems with it, but there may be the opportunity to identify small parcels of land down here where we could have a shared use. Actually, I think they concluded when they looked at that in detail, it would be quite problematic in the Cumbrian environment. We also asked them to sort of just comment on any other opportunities. Now, they have commented on there in terms of some, what I would consider to be relatively small-scale opportunities for things like land subsidy and other things. So I think if you put it all together, where we're at, I think, is that you will always, in any service, find the opportunity for some small gains. Yeah, whether they are in terms of a small tweak to the pricing structure, a change to the staffing level for one or two things, a small change to a subsidy or a grant that you're able to get into. From our perspective, the things that we've identified really in terms of doing some of those marginal changes that we've done really, and that we've done all, I would say we've done most of the obvious ones about tweaking the pricing structure, changing as much as we can the catering offer down there within some of the constraints we've got, and a range of other things. So I think a lot of those marginal improvements have already been yielded, and there are a few that are left. So I think we're actually at the stage where, if we believe, which certainly I think the evidence suggests, that things are going to get much worse in terms of revenue, and if we believe that actually we're not going to have the opportunity to invest any capital down there unless we do something dramatically different, then I think, yeah, we will always look at and we'll incorporate those marginal changes along the way. That's good business practice. But it is that big change that I think we're talking about for the farm, if you want it to be around doing what it's doing now for the next 50 years.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, David, 50 years ago, its conception, it was a brilliant idea. 50 years on now, attitudes have changed. Everything we do is changing. But as we had a walk around the farm yesterday, that isn't all the property, is it? I mean, that's just part of it. There's lots of other land belonging to the farm. How many acres, I don't know. So is there a way of looking at, I mean, there's at the Pentra, there's the other fields, and there's lots of land belonging to the farm that could be disposed of, the income regenerates that. And the future of the farm lies, again, what income comes in. And we talked with Sally yesterday, and there are other people out there doing the same thing. Are they doing something better, or are they doing something we could pick up on to improve the farm itself? And there's a lot can be done. But, the question is, with the land, what is out there? If you can give us a rundown on that. And one for Sally then, again, as I said yesterday, there are people out there doing different things to us. Have you looked at those that think, well, we should be doing that to generate some income from that?
Two bits there, and I'll ask Sally to comment on them as we go through it. In terms of the total acreage, that figure's available somewhere in the report, and Sally probably knows it off the top of her head, so I'll ask her to reflect that. The importance of the land and how the land is defined, I think, relates very much to how we see the future of the farm. That's an obvious thing to say, but what I mean by that is, and the report is fairly open about sort of saying, at the moment, if the council, so although we talk about the farm owning the land, actually the council owns the farm, the council owns the land. So at the moment, if you as the council decided to sell a piece of that land off, the policy is that actually that receipt would go to fund other capital development. Now, we've already talked about that capital development's very unlikely, unless you change your policy, to be down at the farm, to be in libraries, or to be anywhere else. That capital development would almost certainly be a contribution to the 21st Century Schools programme. So the importance of how we see the land relates to how you see the future of the farm and how you see the future of other services. So you're quite rightly to say, actually, there's a lot of land down there. We'll talk about the number in a minute. One of the options that is explored, only in headline terms, is to say, actually, if we were to set up a charitable organisation, not dissimilar to a leisure trust, or work with another organisation that can help us do that, and we were to gift them that land, then what you are doing, in effect, is saying, actually, you are putting a red ring around that land. You know, there are lots of legal controls you can still exercise, but you're putting a red ring around that land. Once it's owned by the charity that operates the farm, any sale or disposal of that land would only benefit the charity that operates the farm. So it would only benefit the farm. So I think going forward, that's not a decision that we're going to get into today. It's not a decision that I think we're going to sort of take lightly as a council. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions and issues around that. But I think it's worth you just kind of pausing and thinking about, okay, if we wanted to try and take the same kind of approach that was taken 50 years ago and say, do you know what, with all this uncertainty, we really want to be sure that in 50 years' time we've got a environmental education improvement, a community amenity, a whole range of other benefits coming from it, then the treatment of the freehold in there could be quite important. So hopefully that addresses those questions. I think you might have raised another point. I'll try and come back to it.
Mary, you're next.
So, did Sally want to? Sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. Right, I think there are multiple parts of that. In terms of the total amount of land currently under the care of the farm, it's in the region of 80 acres, of which approximately half forms the, that's not a precise figure, but roughly 80 acres. and approximately half of that is the area that's open to the public. The report that was, the information included in your report encompassed all of the farmland, and I think there was a reference to that, talking about some areas being underutilised, and that was a reference to some of the outlying land. It's not being utilised as part of the main experience, and we don't have the resource to develop it or do anything different with it. So in terms of if land were to be available for other things for sale or for development, then those are the areas that would be looked at. In terms of whether we look at other venues and compare, yes, of course we do frequently. We're part of a lot of industry organisations such as the National Farm Attractions Network. I sit as a trustee with the Federation of City Farms and Community Gardens. So not only do we go and visit other sites, you know, as anyone would as a visitor, but with a sort of personal and work-related interest. We're also involved on a lot of committees. We've got a lot of contacts, a lot of people to speak to. It was also referenced that over the last 3 years, where we've had to look at savings, we have significantly increased the income at the farm, and we've done that by looking at things like marginal changes to the prices that we're charging people, but also changing what we offer based on our own ideas and reviewing what our competitors and what other providers do. And there are a lot of things that we would still like to do. There's lots of potential, as you've seen when you visited the farm yesterday, in terms of developing what we've already got. So we've got an adventure playground that is in need of replacement. Also developing new areas that are new attractions that would encourage people to come in and to spend money. We also, from a business point of view, have got a lot of ideas and things that we would like to look at changing for the accessibility of the farm and to help it to increase the profit. So to take our cafe as a simple example, it's in an old Welsh farmhouse, it's lovely, but it's got steps, it's not very practical for buggies, it can be quite a cold environment. If we could refurbish that and change that, we could generate more income, make it a much more desirable dining destination. But to do those things, we need capital investment, which, as Dave has outlined, is kind of the other part of the jigsaw puzzle, and the two need to be considered together.
Thank you. Yeah, go on. I'm Mary.
Thank you. Just on that point, the main focus of that answer was addressing the visitor centre aspect of it and pulling in the visitors. What about the opportunities for upscaling the actual farming operations? Because there's revenue derived from pigs and the turkeys and things like that. If there's only 40 acres that are being effectively utilised for access to the public, there's another 40 acres there. What are the opportunities for upscaling the farming operations on that available land to increase revenues?
We do a range of different farming things. A major difference for us, because we are a farm that serves the public community, we're an open farm, so we've got a small number of a large range of different animals. Whereas if you were farming the land commercially, you'd probably take a completely different approach and perhaps look at, a large sheep production unit or something. The land that we've got isn't particularly suitable for much arable cultivation, and even if we were to look down those lines, we don't have any of the equipment for it, so you'd be looking at bringing contractors in, etc. So there are opportunities, there are things that you could look at doing from a farming point of view, but they would again require investment, either or probably both capital investment and revenue investment to run and those extra things, to look after the extra animals or tend the crops or whatever we looked at doing. And it isn't a massively sort of profitable industry. There aren't a lot of people who are going to be making a vast living from farming, so I'm not saying there's no potential to do it, but you could put a lot of resource, and it wouldn't be generating vast amounts of additional profit.
You reminded me of the other aspect of this, which is 106 mitigation and the environmental thing, which you've also done as well up there, the side of the trees and the rest of it. What is there any profitability in that at all in terms of running the farm? As was the education side is part of that as well, isn't it?
Yes. I don't know if I'm sure exactly what you're asking me there. We do a lot.
In terms of Hughes farming, it's a Hughes farming question. A lot of farms now are deriving profit out of. You said about the ponds, the 106, and actually farming the environment is an aspect of farming these days, which you do seem to do a bit of as well. Yeah, there's certainly income associated with a lot of the things that we do.
So we do receive some money for the way in which the land is managed through different schemes. And very important, as you say, we utilise the land and do a lot of education work, not just around food production, but specifically around engaging with the environment, biodiversity, understanding care of the landscape. So there is income associated with that, but in terms of, I think, what we're trying to address, the scale of the money, there's not a solution in there. We're not going to suddenly be able to generate the kind of revenue that we're needing.
Yes. Just a few points. We've talked a lot about, schools and education, and can I say that we've got a much valued facility there, not solely for school visits, and I'm particularly pleased, I'm a governor on a school that can walk, pupils can walk there. And I think Eston, was very well aware of that kind of facility because we were the primary school that had an excellent in its last Eston inspection. But there are a whole host of other service areas that we've identified in our corporate plan too that we are going to concentrate on. And one, of course, is dealing with vulnerable children, other the health of young people, physical, mental health, raising educational standards, and I know that you do offer certification in certain level 1 things as well. And in this walk that we had yesterday, we spent a lot of time, those of us who didn't get into conversation with the rabbits had a lot of time talking to some of the visitors. It was very heartening to see lots of young mothers there. Tuesdays is Toddler's Day, and the children were there, and mother after mother said, I came into this area, I moved into the area, I didn't know anyone. Now, for the last few years, I've had a close circle of friends, and we really value this facility. There were disabled young children. There were also disabled and some with learning disabilities who were doing work on the farm, etc. I can't think of one project that most closely links our corporate to plan objectives more than perhaps the farm, and I know we must do everything to protect that. But we can expand in ways that have not even been mentioned. I know that there's a crying need for perhaps bunkhouse accommodation for school groups throughout Wales and England to come for that kind of hands-on experience holiday, or even the leasing of holiday-let cottages or caravan site on part of it. I would rather see us expand than just sell off a chunk of land and, you only get the sale once for that. We need to have a look at those entrepreneurial schemes, and they're not new. I can remember 25 years ago discussing, when I first, came on to community councils and so on, some of those schemes that could bring in substantial additional revenue. But I think if anyone just thinks it's a place where you can go for the day and then go a year later, no, it's considered to be central to the well-being of the communities surrounding it and wider afield, and we must do all that we can to preserve that. I must say I have severe doubts about selling off huge tracts of land when perhaps we can build and lease and have a regular income, and I think that needs to be looked at more closely from that financial aspect, because once again, to recoin a phrase, we can look at cost, but let's also estimate the real value of what's offered on the farm.
I think that's really helpful, actually, Councillor Barnett.
Thank you,
in
Mary.
terms of the, that's a really good exposition, I think, of the value that we see in the farm, but it's better that actually it comes from the community itself and is described that way, so I think that's really helpful. I think in terms of selling land off, there's certainly no proposal. We've certainly just sort of, along with all the other options that are referenced in there, just to reassure members of the community and everybody else who's listening and involved in this, we've simply identified that under a particular set of circumstances, it may offer, if things got much, much worse in terms of the finance, if things didn't turn out the way that we would certainly expect them to based on our experience from similar operations, then there is an opportunity there that could be constructed if things are done in a particular way, no more than that. And I think the other point around kind of, intensifying some of the other things, I think Sally's mentioned really the fact that we've been able to change the operating cost at the farm by 120,000 over 3 to 4 years, I think is testament that the staff down there take just about every opportunity that they can to do that. Thank you, Chair.
Bill? Thank you, Chair. Could I ask Stuart, afternoon Stuart and Sally, obviously. Thank you for the trip round yesterday. It was really interesting and an eye-opener. But could I ask Stuart, as a sports development officer, what ideas you have to develop the farm towards sport and... I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Stuart.
No, that's fine. Obviously, from our point of view, there's, and linking into Councillor Barnett's comment about the links with the corporate plan too, there's obviously Keffel D carriage riding group that are down there and regularly use the one of the paddocks for carriage riding and carriage racing, which is obviously, from our point of view, something that we support. To be honest with you, I think it's something that we can certainly look into. As was mentioned, there's a number of schools around the area that can walk, and I think it's a combination of both, really. Ourselves as the sports development team and the farm team putting things together that we can exercise there, whether or not it's sports days, Olympic themed days, certainly around the opportunities that are around the number or the numerous sporting events that are now taking on. There's a combination between the two. It's also mentioned that from our point of view, there's a huge amount of work now for us around physical literacy, which allows young children to be able to manage their bodies, which will potentially, obviously, offset a number of potential life-changing problems in future, but maintaining that understanding of how to move their body in certain positions, entertaining an introduction to sport and a love of sport, and certainly working with the Toddler Tuesdays that are currently doing. There's a number of weeks that we've done to do that. So from that point of view, we're in and hitting the younger ones, but it's also, from our point of view, the potential impact on young parents. And certainly for us, it's something that we'd like to expand with in terms of grandparents, etc. There's a number of people that now have their children long-term because of daycare costs. It's how we can incorporate that in perhaps a complete package. But certainly the initial thing would be around the schools and entering, a themed day, which could incorporate education around the farm, plus also a sporting event as well.
Well, I was simply just going to say, I think the reason I smiled when you asked that question, Councillor, was because I thought Stuart's here really because his role, he is the sports development manager, absolutely, but his role in this project going forward will be about helping us, if we decide to create the charitable trust, if we decide to actually put in place the change management process. So it's very much more of a sort of a general management role rather than a sports development role. But I think that was quite helpful, actually, because there's some ideas in there that again, can help with the margins, aren't there? Yeah.
I think Nigel's going to ask you some questions around the harder stuff now.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to welcome our guest from Groundwork Wales. And basically, could you tell us about the work that you are doing to help with gaining the future of the farm?
Certainly will. We are a national charity. Previously, we've amalgamated now, so we're Groundwork Wales. We were previously a number of smaller groundwork trusts working very locally. We have been the recipient of one of the first round of community asset transfer grants through Big Lottery. We were able to acquire the premises that we've rented for 20 years from the local authority in Caerphilly. And we were able to then receive a grant of over £1 million, which enabled us to upgrade the property, make it much more fit for purpose as a modern office, remove some difficult buildings, and improve our sustainability financially and as a community organisation by owning the asset that we use as our headquarters, but also creating business starter units for other small businesses, creating improved workshop and classroom space for activities that we contribute to the community, and the capacity to improve our building internally so that we could offer office space, IT suite, and so on to partner organisations who co-locate with us or deliver similar activities that then generates income to our bottom line. So we essentially saved £40,000 in rent per year, and we improved our asset so that we could then capitalise on that and generate income through its use. So I was asked by Dave and the team to come and talk about our experience of doing that. We not only wrote a successful bid in the first round. There were only 8 organisations in Wales that received funding in the first round, but we were then able to deliver a successful programme, and that was in 2012. It was completed in 2012, and we've been running that programme as an environment centre ever since. So I've really advised the team, I've advised Dave, I've worked with Sally to look at this new round of community asset transfer funding. It's the last round, so it's the last opportunity that we know of that will happen with Big Lottery. And really I've been brought in simply to advise in terms of writing a bid, looking at what the sustainability issues are around the farm itself, and sort of cooperating to advise and work up a programme that stacks up and hopefully will improve the sustainability, the financial sustainability, improve the facilities at the farm in the way that the officers know needs to happen. So really as an advisor.
So, on the general things, in nuts and bolts terms, it's as the thing that we're all concerned with is the future sustainability of the farm. So how would going into this model help the sustainability of the, in your opinion, take forward the sustainability of the farm from what you can see?
So there are a number of ways. One is obviously it would bring us in some development funding. If we're awarded at the first stage, which we'll find out just after Christmas, then it will bring us some development monies that can be put into looking at the capital works that need to happen at the farm in order to make it a more sustainable enterprise. So there's that phase of work. Then if we're sufficiently able to develop up that development work and put into stage 2, that will then bring some funding that will enable us to improve the physical aspects of the farm. A new tractor will be a massive support. We've looked at potential around the Dragon feature, which is in need of some repair and some refurbishment, some upgrading. We've looked at building potentially a wider splash park visitor attraction there, and we've looked at putting the mains water supply into that so that we reduce the costs in maintaining, and there are some issues around water quality that cost the farm. We've also looked at some funding around marketing support, so that we will take a look at the wider pull as an attraction. It would enable us to have an extra member of staff that would specifically look at the change management process and the marketing of the new entity, and potentially with the model, or one of the models that we've looked at, which is it transferring into a charitable organisation, there are a number of financial benefits to that, in that you can claim, for example, gift aid on donations in lieu of entry fees, so that would increase revenue. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything, Dave, that we've talked through. There are a number of VAT implications that could provide an improved running, potentially.
Yes, you mentioned the VAT thing, which in the report that you on page I can go back to it. Yes, page 21 of the report, 5.7. You talk about the VAT, and one of the concerns which I that recently there was a report from based on a report from the National Audit Office about the collapse of an organisation that was set up by 2 hospital trusts in England, is that they were looking to take over certain services, and they brought together a joint venture, but they didn't realise that the joint ventures, that the financial projections they made were on a particular joint venture, and they didn't realise that the rules of the joint venture were different from their own rules, and particularly on VAT. And in many ways it caused problems with their costs, and that's something which I think is very important to realise.
Sorry, I'm not used to this. Yeah, I need one for my office, I think, for Tannoy. No, so we have included, as part of the development grant funding that we've put in, specialist VAT advice, and around specialist advice around the farming finances element of the programme. So there is still some scoping work to be done. What we've done is we've put in for the first phase that will allow us to do that advanced scoping work and be absolutely sure that we're receiving the correct advice at high level, and that is being interpreted then in the correct manner and part of the ongoing business plan appropriately. So I can't remember the exact amount that we've requested for that, but we did put a reasonable figure in to cover that specific financial advice.
Hugh.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask, it sounds very encouraging, the ideas that you've come up with so far, potential ideas for the future sustainability of it. What I want to get at is the report basically highlights, I don't know if you can do a direct comparison, because some of the data in it was looking at these type of farms in inner city environments. So you couldn't take a direct comparison from visitor numbers and what have you. But the piece of information that stuck out was, even with receiving subsidies, only a small number of these type of community farms actually had a surplus. Going forwards, how does, if this venture, if Groundworks Wales were successful, how does the changes that are envisaged basically turn it around so that going forwards the farm becomes at least self-sustainable? And what the second part of this is, what do Groundwork Wales get out of this? I understand that there's been a fee that's been paid for submitting the application for access, to secure the access to, possible access to the CAT funding. Is Groundwork Wales a non-profit making organisation? And you mentioned that there's this one relationship that you've got with Caerphilly Borough Council already. Are there any others? Are there any other models? Because it sounded from what you were saying, the experience with Caerphilly was not of this particular type of amenity.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few questions in there, so it's probably helpful if I preface a couple that Katie can answer, and I think go back to something that we said at the beginning of this, so that actually we've got Groundwork Wales along, and the analogy we used is ask the icing on the cake, and what we're talking about is the cake itself as well. So whilst we're talking about some added value that Groundwork Wales can bring, and we can concentrate on that in a second, one of the key points of the scrutiny is to ensure that you are content or otherwise that the overall conversion to a non-profit distributing organisation, which is what we're talking about as the cake, is actually a substantively good strategy in its own right, irrespective of whether then we are able to conclude the CAT. And I say that because I think, I was at pains to sort of draw a ring around that at the beginning, because there are lots of issues. We've got one relationship with Groundwork Wales at the moment. If we decide to convert to a charitable trust, we may need to go through a procurement process about who do we work with. That may or may not be Groundwork Wales. So I think it's really important that we hold that distinction very clearly. So having said that, I'll comment on 2 or 3 things, then I'll ask Katie to fill in the gaps about the bits that are specific to Groundwork Wales. I think the first thing to sort of say is, I think you're quite right, it is very difficult, and the report makes it clear for us to make like-for-like comparisons. we have drawn some of those comparisons, and that's why one of the reasons that we are reasonably confident that the non-profit distributing organisation, the charitable company model, the charitable trust model, is a good one, is that actually the vast majority of those organisations are set up in that way, and when you look at the percentage of the income that is generated through grants and other funding from those other organisations, because they are charities, it is very much the case that actually we see that as one of the big benefits for Green Meadow. I think you mentioned about when would the farm be self-sustaining. Well, one of the issues I think to point out is we will never move to, certainly there isn't a proposition on the table at the moment about moving to the farm not ever having council support. I think what we're saying is that we think we have already reduced the subsidy significantly. We think there are, under a charitable trust model, ways in which we can reduce that subsidy further, but there will always be a requirement for a subsidy in the same way there is with the Leisure Trust, in the same way there is an ongoing subsidy paid to the museum and so on and so forth. So I think it's just to make those two key points. I'll mention about the fee, and then I'll leave Katie to pick up about the relationship with others. The fee that we paid for Groundwork Wales to do this piece of work is simply a fee to cover Katie's time while she worked on this. I think it was under £3,000. So it's a relatively small investment from our point of view in a relatively big opportunity. And it was simply a cost recovery model. It's not actually making a profit. So if I leave you then, Katie, to pick up the other issues in there. But I thought it's really important that we get the understanding of the relationship between the Council and Groundwork Wales right, and also hold in your mind we're talking about the cake, and it's great if we can get the cake and then we can ice it as well. But they are two different things.
So Groundwork Wales is a registered charity and a company limited by guarantee. Traditionally, when there were good times around European funding and lots of grant funding available, as an organisation that's been running for 30 years in Wales in its various incarnations, we ran a number of grant-funded schemes, and that was essentially what we did as a third sector organisation. Our strap line, if you will, is changing places, changing lives. We're very much aligned to environmental work and to supporting people in environments, and we all know about the research around the well-being benefits of people being active in the outdoors, community cohesion. We work a lot with the results of adverse childhood experiences, people that have difficulties in their lives around places where there is multiple deprivation. And we work to bring people together in some shape or form in the environment, whether that's through employability, through work placements. We run social enterprises now. We've moved from being wholly dependent really on grant funding and Wales government support through core funding to running social enterprise activities, which include things like the Green Dragon Environmental Standard, which is an environmental management system. We also run a furniture reuse recycling organisation which works as a social enterprise in its own right as part of our trading subsidiary, and we run Green Care, which is about grounds maintenance on a contract basis. So we work with housing associations and other organisations, and we generate income through contracts. And through all of those activities, we offer people opportunities to engage that they wouldn't otherwise have. So we're very much aligned really with the ethos of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and with the ethos of Green Meadow Community Farm, which does an awful lot of the same types of work that we do. So it was felt that there was not only the fact that we are aligned in that way in terms of what we're there to do, our purpose, but also in the terms of the fact that we had been successful in receiving community asset transfer monies and turning something which had been to some degree a liability to the organisation into something that was an asset that could be made to work in its own right. We do still receive some core funding through Wales Government and through some local authorities. We do still bid for grant funding through all sorts of different avenues, and I think the basic premise of the idea is that if you run the community farm through a charitable setup and not for profit, because we have trustees that are voluntary and all of our money is public money, our reserves are public reserves, they're not privately owned, nobody receives profit as a result of our organisation, that there were benefits to Green Meadow Community Farm moving to that model, where as a local authority there are an awful lot of grant-funded opportunities that the farm can't apply for, but as a charity could potentially apply for.
Yeah, I'm Deputy Clare, a non-prejudicial interest in that I'm a trustee of an organisation that also has dealings with one of those offshoots you mentioned. However, my question is both to the Chair and to Dave on the timeline underpinning this, because obviously we're all grateful to the executive member for asking us to consider all these possible proposals and to look at look at the whole setup, and we have visited the farm, though many of us go there regularly anyway. But I'm quite interested in now the timetable that we have to really adhere to, in that normally, having gone through scrutiny, there does need to be some consideration by the political groups, and I'm aware that the only member sitting around this table who, there are two, there's the leader of the opposition and a member of another political group, and the rest of us belong to the majority group, but there are other councillors. Has it been decided or suggested that we might have a full scrutiny committee, and then how does this fit in to the whole political process of Cabinet, Council, etc., bearing in mind that we are facing in May, some of you are facing in May 2017 political local government elections, and there will be a period of purdah. I want to know where the whole timetable is for political decision making.
Mary said she was bringing it up, and it's such an interesting point I hadn't conceived of.
Oh, there it is, working now, okay. Well, as officers, obviously, you wouldn't expect us to comment on political arrangements, but from our point of view, the first time, so the suggestion is that actually the executive member has already considered quite a lot of the information that's in here. We've done that in consultation with the Farm Shadow Board. We've engaged employees down there. We've talked to other stakeholders. I think we're in a place as a collective where we think actually there are more merits than disadvantages to exploring this further. Clearly, you know, we're open to hear whether there is a different view formed as a result of this type of conversation. If that isn't the case, then I think we can move, and certainly the expectation is that we will move quite quickly. So to answer your point directly about at what point will there be any decision-making by the Council's executive, it probably wouldn't be until we get as far as maybe about June, early July, at which point then we'll know two or three things. We will know, for example, we'll continue to do the work on modelling the finance, because we'll know a little bit more about the Council's position as well as about the outturn of the farm and a whole range of other things. So we will continue to do that work between now and June. We will continue to do the work around kind of looking at, okay, well, what are the changes and how do we describe those changes in terms of the conversion from a local authority service to a charitable service, and what form does that take? And there's quite a lot of detail to be worked through in that, but we'll start to get some firm proposals out of that. We'll have some firm proposals out of whether we think there is a partner, whether that's Groundwork Wales or another partner that we may advertise for who's successful in that process that could bring experience and knowledge to the party for us. And we can appoint that partner subject to council decisions. So actually we can do everything subject to the council saying yes or no. And if the council says no at a later date, everybody walks away and we're no worse off than where we are now. So I expect it to be around about sort of June, and I think the report refers to it actually, around June time, that the Cabinet will need to consider the matter in lots of detail. Normally processes that we proceed that with member seminars and other opportunities for exploration.
You rather answered Mary's earlier question, so that's great. Are you okay with that now?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's obviously a decision for a future Cabinet and a future Council.
I want to ask a question myself, which I was going to ask before. It's round where we want to go with the CAP, between the asset transfer and yourself, because one thing that occurred to me when you were talking about it, and it's for Sal as well, really, if we're going to go ahead with the trust, and obviously when you do a trust, it has core objectives, and I'm just thinking to myself, what are they? Because it's fundamental. It's a community farm, it's like a city farm, it's like a settlement. And obviously, you've alluded to some of the ideas you've got, but putting this down on paper and saying, what does this new body do, it's rather fundamental. And I'm thinking, oh yes, it's a community farm, but what is that really? Educational establishment, a settlement? It's really quite an interesting thing to put down, because I think it's a relatively unique type of animal. So some ideas on that one? Because I think where we do the discussion on the rest of this is around what this animal is.
So that really is the work that we need to do in the development phase.
Yeah.
And
we need some idea, even discussing it, I think.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Chair, and I think the report is clear, isn't it? If we saw this facility as a farm, going back to some of the discussion we had earlier on, then you would use the land in a completely different way, and you wouldn't admit 40,000 young people to crawl all over it, because that implies all the health and safety standards and the other things. If you use this land as an asset to maximise the income from it, you'd probably do something completely different with it. And I think the problem we've consistently had, the problem you've consistently had as members, is the farm is unique, and therefore I think, we've said it in the report, the solution to the farm also needs to be made into Ovine, so when we come to draft those charitable objectives, if that's the way that this discussion concludes, then actually it will be reflective of all of the things that we've talked about. It will be reflective of the fact that there is an educative role to the farm. It will be reflective of the fact that we expect benefits for future generations to be protected, and so on. I think, more than that, we can't answer at this stage, but I think that gives you a sense of, and the whole discussion really, I think, has given you a sense of the importance of the unique nature of the farm, and why then it's so challenging to find a kind of solution for it.
Hugh?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, David. If you were looking at this from a cold, clinical, financial perspective, the existing model doesn't work. The only answer would be to find parcels of the land that you could get the council to change use of from agricultural use to permitted development, to have swathes for housing on there, and sell off the farm. That would be prudent in the financial sense. Having visited the farm yesterday with all the other councillors, it was a real eye-opener, and you can see what an actual asset it is to the community that we've got sitting there. What really touched me was the look on of joy on some of the disabled kids' faces when they were going round, and what sort of price can you attach to that. So a lot of it is, unfortunately, because of the economic realities, which I touched upon, the financing. I mean, I do want to bring a motion before full council so that we're not basing decisions going forwards for the next 2-3 years on assumptions that were in November 2015, but that's a separate issue. If you look at the model, it's clear, as you said, it's not currently sustainable in the medium to long term because of the shortfalls, potentially on revenue side, which is targets getting harder to achieve, but as you said, the requirement for the capital investment to secure the future of it longer term. And I'm very much aware that we've got obligations now with the legislation and the Future Generations Act and sustainability. I think what the Chair was trying to eke out of you earlier with his earlier question was to get some idea of the extent of collaboration with local community groups, such as maybe Friends of the Earth, other organisations that work locally. I know there's allotments and there's various other things. So, what sort of consultation will there be with public? I do think that the existing model does need to be radically looked at, and I think there are opportunities there, albeit they might be for limited revenue. You said in terms of the farming side, but with due respect to your answer to that, there's still 50% of the site that is not open to public access. So the model that's there does need to be looked at in terms of maximising revenues, whether it's planting more fruit trees and having orchards, selling more produce, upscaling the number of pigs. The focus of the visit yesterday, although it was very beneficial, was solely on the visitor side and the education side, and it was clear from the education side as well there are still a lot further opportunities that could be advanced there. So there's a lot in there, but I do think there needs to be a lot more consultation in terms of how we take this forward if we go down this trust approach.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think my reflections on that are twofold, really. I would agree that, I think, and we've covered it, that actually we do need to keep an eye on absolutely every marginal opportunity down there. There's very, very infrequently, I think, a month or two goes by when the three of us don't talk about, right, okay, what's changed and how's the finance looking down at the farm, you know. So I think that focus is there, and there will always be marginal opportunities, but there will be that. I think that the second point about community consultation is probably something that we need to think through in a little bit more detail, because I think it's more around engagement, or it's as much around engagement as it is around consultation. I think we've all found it quite challenging to try and write a report that summarises in sufficient detail all of the issues that you've got to consider as members, you know, and I think that's quite a challenge if you were to openly consult on the future of the farm. I think, therefore, we think it's, and also, of course, you raise expectations that actually you'll do whatever that consultation determines. And that may or may not be what you as elected members decide you want to do with the farm. Different to that, and more important than that in some ways, is should we move to a model that is about non-profit distributing organisation running the farm, the opportunities for engagement and to some degree ownership and involvement in the decision making going forward for the next 50 years for that community, I think are radically different from where they are now. And I think that's what you're getting at. That's a huge opportunity as well.
Could I say something about Councillor Bevan? He hasn't been there before. It's actually quite valuable, his view on it, amongst all of us that have been there. Steve, would you like to make your views on it?
Yes, well, I'm not going to repeat what other people have said during the course of the afternoon. I anticipated saying some of those things myself, but it was overtaken by others, and that's fine as far as I'm concerned. I'm not too bothered about that. It seems apparent to me that the current situation that we have, I hesitate to use the word not working because that implies criticism, and I don't wish to imply that, because I know that people have put a lot of effort over many, many years in respect of the farm. I have said before, the farm sits in the ward that I represent, although no one from that ward that I represent have ever sat on the Farms Committee. But that's yesterday. We can do something today, and we can do something tomorrow. Obviously, things are going to have to change. I've sat on panels like this in other arenas, and the difficulty that I have is if, perhaps, might, and but. I need to investigate a proposition and then challenge it to satisfy myself that it is a workable way forward. I think that's been said by the officers this afternoon, quite frankly, that there is a major challenge in putting forward here a report. However, I believe that a change in the way in which the farm is managed, it has to be said that the charitable trust status certainly seems to be the flavour of the year and the day. Is it all going to work? We'll answer that in about 5 to 10 years' time, because no one knows whether it'll work, and you've got to live in the real world. And what I would, at this stage, be thinking is the way forward. We've listened to what's been said to us this afternoon. We've had the opportunity to read the report. I go to the farm frequently and regularly with little people in my family. I know how they engage with it when they go there. They're extremely excited. that was witnessed yesterday, and when I had a senior moment on Monday and turned up for the meeting at 10 o'clock Monday morning instead of Tuesday morning, I did spend some time walking around the farm once again and just getting a flavour and a feeling for it. And on that occasion, there was certainly one school from Newport there, and that was Somerton School, and there were other schools there as well. And you would have been blind if you could not see the reaction from the children that were there. And I think the point has also been made this afternoon that although this is about cash, it's about cost and all the rest of this, but the other part of it is that when you want something which serves a community, then it's got to be paid for. It'll never be, as I see it, this organisations and some of the others we got, can ever be permanently sustainable. It is physically impossible, and I think that we could get in danger of spending a great deal of time trying to meet that challenge when we never will be able to do it. So I think that from this afternoon, and we'll discuss this perhaps when our officers have left us, but we've got to look to do, in my opinion, something which is different. The whole concept of the charitable trust, on the face of it, seems to be the way forward. And I think that even with Groundworks Wales, I had quite a bit of involvement with those when I was working at Caerphilly County Borough Council, so I do know all about that, and the wonderful things that they did over there when they were working within that environment, and the fact that it's now moved on to the whole of Wales is probably a very good way forward. But as I say, without repeating myself, I need to see a plan that I can read, that I can understand, and then support and or challenge in order to move things forward. Now, as everything is unlikely to come to the forefront again much before the elections come in, will I be back here? Well, that's up to the people where I'm from. It's their decision. But at the same time, I think that we need to have things to read. The sooner, the better, quite frankly. And quite frankly, no one has said anything to me this afternoon which changes my mind from the other day that this is a way that we must consider moving forward.
Thank you, Steve. I think another one from... Yeah, Ron?
Thank you, Chair. Well, as Steve just said, and I concur with him, what I did find out about yesterday's walk around the farm, we have a Dr. Doodle, Councillor Brooks.
Would you stop telling everybody that?
It's rabbits, yeah. I did get a little bit worried there, but I thought, look, he's happy enough in his own little world, but still. But as Councillor Brooks just said then, there's only one way forward. As it is now, it's never going to work, so there has to be changes. After 50 years, we have to look at it. And as I was talking to Sally yesterday, there are lots of changes to be made there to expand on it, to bring visitors in. You have to expand and offer more for your money. Or as it gets bigger, again, the revenue coming in, the prices alter as we know. But the future of the farm is total change. And the charitable status, and as Steve just said, is it going to work? I mean, 10 years' time, it could be another position like we are today. It's not working as it is. But as we are today, as we know, and it's not going to be till next year, and who's ever back on council next year, there'll be lots of changes. But it has to go forward for a change. And if the charitable status is the only way around it, it's up to members to decide.
Looks like we all agree with that. Hugh, do you agree?
Yeah, just to add my sentiment to that, and this is not just about preserving the the leader's legacy, although this is one of the good things that he has brought in. And it's the legacy for our children and our children's children. It is educational, it's aspirational, and it's so many non-financial benefits to the community that this particular asset brings that you can't translate down to money. As we're all aware, and I was saying to one of Sally's colleagues yesterday, none of us really wanted to be in this position when we got into politics to have to make these kind of decisions about what cuts, unfortunately. But the reality is, as long as we continue to ring-fence social services and education, which take up about 75–80% of the expenditure of this council, then it leaves a very small part that we end up looking at to see where these cuts are made to, frontline services and non-statutory, all the nice things that, we like to provide as a council. So I echo the comments made by my colleagues here. I think that to avoid future councillors having similar meetings further down the line, and doing away with this altogether, we have to seize this opportunity that we have now, and it probably is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity because we've got this small window of funding, possibility of funding from the CAT. I know it's the icing on the cake, but I think, I think I will certainly be voting to go down the route of it going down the charitable trust status.
Thank you. Nigel?
Yes, thanks, Chair. As Doswell said, I think also one of the challenges that we face is, and I think it'd be interesting to hear both from the council view, from the farm view, and also from our outside view, is the challenge of making sure that the management and future board members have the necessary skills and experience. Because the thing is that we will be talking running a major business, and with all that entails. And so the question is that when it comes to the founding of these things, will it be a case of whether it should be just what I would call the in quotes local worthies, or are we looking, maybe having to look further afield?
Let me just reassure members, actually, I think that point is very well made. I think one of the benefits of a charitable trust model is the opportunity to bring in the right kind of expertise, whether that is in an existing organisation or elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, certainly the duty that we owe the farm is to ensure that its future governance is very, very strong indeed.
I would like to see personally that we have a balance between expertise and representation. I think that's something that maybe need to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think I won't prolong the meeting. I think I'll just offer two observations. One is I think the point we discussed earlier on about engagement is a really well-made point, actually, and I think it relates back to when we do the detailed work, which is Councillor Brooks's point as well. Actually, a lot of that will become apparent in the granular detail that you need to be reassured around, or you can challenge. I think that's absolutely right. And then I think the only other thing that I would offer by sort of concluding comment from my perspective is that it's really refreshing to come along to a scrutiny committee that talks about value as well as cost. And from my point of view, as somebody who's worked a lot in local authorities over the years, it's reassuring to hear members talk so passionately about value for community rather than just cost. Because, one of the things that we always wrestle with is, what are we going to lose? Well, we're always going to drop cost off, but if we're not careful, if you're not conscious about it, you inadvertently drop a lot of value as well. So from my point of view, I think, I'll conclude by saying, thank you very much. From my point of view, I think that's been a really helpful set of conversations. I'm sure the executive member will be able to form some decisions around the next steps that are appropriate to that conversation.
I think Phil wants to say something.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's not on the agenda, Chair, but in the future, if this trust goes ahead for the farm, will we be looking to transfer other assets such as Blahaven Workman's Hall, Pontypool Museum and Lanneravon Manor? in the same way, just to save the council money?
Well, the only one of those that I can possibly comment on actually is Llanrabban Manor, because that falls under my remit. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you have to sort of reflect on, don't you, the circumstances facing the council as they may or may not turn out to be in the next 20 years or so, and whether it remains appropriate for us to own assets that may be better utilised within the community by community members under a different model. You know, there's no proposal for that at the moment. This is simply around the farm.
I would like to commend members for going on the visit, taking in the thing, and actually I hope it's reflected in this conversation today. I mean, it's a bit of statement thing going on, but we've bought in, I think we've bought into the idea of the trust. I hope we've got that message on that. And the value of the work going on at the farm. I mean, you've got to go off and do some work. Somebody's put the plan on here, and I think you've got the message, which is I think members are fairly passionate about this farm, aren't they? They think they want to buy into a future of it, and I think that's the case. I'm sure they're going to be looking at it with granddaughters and various other things and thinking, what are we down there? But there's lots and lots of ideas in the community, and I think that was the thing that came back as well. Anything else you want to say? We also got.
Yeah, just one more thing. So I think it's which a number of us have spoken about in the past. And I'd like to know how Granwell Wales think about this, is that we do have a number of organisations which work on a similar model. And one of the things we haven't talked about is about bringing together a lot of the back office services that they operate I mean, obviously, things like wages and that sort of thing, and do it as administration. In your experience coming from an outside, would you say that if this became part of a back office network, that it could deliver savings down the line in that way?
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question 100%. Are you talking about the savings that could be made through bringing the farm into a trust model?
Well, not just that, being part of the trust model, but then tapping into existing trust organisations which maybe operate things particularly in the administrative back office way, and bringing them to and as a way of pooling their costs. That we know that there might be other organisations which are running a back office service, and maybe that they could run their back office through that organisation. I don't know if you've had any experience of it yourself, but it's something we have, which I know a number of us have, because so many of us are working with those sorts of organisations.
So you're talking about other organisations that could acquire the services of the charitable trust and work in partnership? Not sure.
Potentially, I think what the council is wanting to explore is whether there might be economies from scale about a number of local trusts working together. But I think that's the sort of question that I think is very much around when we model a detailed proposition around that. Yeah.
Got a thing on. The observation that was made yesterday was that certain people, I'm probably one of them as well, involved in local charitable action all over the place. And there's kind of network already, well, you're probably quite aware of, we've got lots of things going on, all round Cwmbran, all round Torfaen, and it's a kind of economies of scale. I think that's what Nigel was on about. And we form lots of networks. It's obvious that can happen. And obviously with the council, even with the council still, if we were trying, it's an alternative model which you were talking about in this report. Right. Sorry. Really like you ought to have the last word on this.
No, I don't know about the last word. I just wanted to make one point of clarification, just reflecting on things that have been said. I don't want to take the conversation back at all, but I just wanted to be clear when I said about only half of the farm site being used as the visitor attraction. I didn't mean to imply that the other half wasn't being used for anything. And we do have a large fruit orchard on it, and we use it for grazing and haymaking, etc. So just in case that had been as I say, inadvertently misleading. Just wanted to clarify that. And otherwise, really just to thank you for coming on the visit, and obviously for taking the time today and giving things your consideration. And as David said, you know, including in that the thoughts and discussions around the value and not just the costs that are associated with the farm.
Thank you, Sally. I mean, we much appreciate the work down there, and I think everybody does. And you know, it's great to have that yarn yesterday, and you did look after us well down there. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And we'll have a deliberation. I'm sure there'll be a lot of recommendations coming out of this. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks. Bye. Recommendations. Do you want to throw in them in, or shall we get back?
I think that the comments I made were extremely general, and I hope that they were taken as being extremely general, because I don't think there is a possibility to actually get into any detail on it. And it's the old saying, as far as I'm concerned, you've got to have something that you can look at and you can read and that you can understand to enable you to be able to consider the way forward. So I suppose to a degree what I'm saying is that the principle is, it seems, that subject to further scrutiny, that the suggestion of going into a charitable trust may be one of the a more appropriate ways of the management of the farm travelling.
Yeah, it states there in the scrutiny activity, obviously, that if you go with that preferred option, it's for members to explore the detail further. You're not making the decision
That is your major number one recommendation, which everybody seems to be in agreement with. Yes. Okay, put that down. Any more recommendations?
With regard to the last suggested scrutiny activity there with the freehold disposal of land, I got the impression that that wasn't a desired option. Obviously, that you prefer to see the land used in other ways to create longer-term income for the farm.
If we're going to proceed down this route, it does mention that in the report the councillors may comment. My personal opinion would be I would like to see it done on a transfer of the leasehold of the land and the council retains the freehold.
You've got a lot of people in agreement with you on that. I think we all agreed on that one.
This is
I don't know
why,
what you say on that. You're saying, yeah.
This is why, Chair. Yeah, that was the reason why I was being fairly loose in what I was saying. You know, basically, at the end of the day, I feel it's far better for the council to retain ownership of the land. I understand the difficulties with regard to the way in which any assets which could be sold wouldn't go to the farm, it would go to something else. However, I think that we've all appreciated in the last half a dozen or so months worldwide that things can change in a dramatic way. So, for the moment, I don't think we need to go up that route.
Can I make that what you've just said, it seems to be a consensus on that. Is that a recommendation or a view?
Well, I think it's a view, but I wanted to put things forward in a way that there was always an opportunity to revisit.
No, I think there's a general view across the...
We don't want to sell it off. Yeah. We don't want to sell it off.
No, I think we can say that. I think that's a recommendation, Hugh, because everybody's in agreement with you.
The point is, Chair, there seems to be consensus that the trust is the way forward to protect and preserve, right? But, as Councillor Brooks said, we live in an uncertain world. A charitable trust could end up going bust. Now, that would be the worst case scenario, and you know, we hope that that doesn't happen. But if council retains the freehold, it affords us that protection in the longer term. If the freehold was transferred over to the charitable trust, I get what they're saying about being able to sell off parcels of land and use the money to give them capital investment, but there seemed to be also unanimous consensus among this committee today that we wanted them to retain all the land, and we did not wish them to sell off parcels of land for housing development. And if they go to charitable trust, as they said, it will open up doors for them to explore a lot more avenues for funding for capital investment.
It's just sort of safeguarded.
It was safeguarding them with a freehold, safeguarding the council's interests. So the council retains the freehold? Yes. Yeah. Totally so? Yes. Okay. That's a recommendation. Good. Any more?
About the engagement and looking at ways to engage as widely as possible with all the stakeholders involved.
Yeah, that was, I think we were unanimous on that.
Yeah,
and I think I think the point was well made. Is that sometimes is that too often with consultations is that it doesn't quite get the is that sometimes it doesn't bring in the people that we want to, and it must be a full engagement with the widest possible group, and again it must be engagement, not just as a consultation, as was rightly said by David Congreve, was that is that too often the thing with consultation, it's the thing of we are consulting, therefore that's what we're going to do. The thing is, with engagement, it's about saying, well, be part of it, to be part of it, not just say, well, you've consulted me, I think you should do this, so you should do it. Which, and I think with engagement, I think it's a case of realising that you're part of a more general debate on the matter, and looking and being able to look at everything, and maybe even look at your own and say, well, actually, that's better. So I think that's why I think the phrase engagement is a much better one than consultation.
I personally take the view that any potential board for this thing, I take the view that we should have the right people on it, but also a percentage of people that are local. It's got to be a partnership. Don't know why you don't really agree with me on that.
What I always turn around and say is that you have to have people who understand the running and the management of that particular type of thing at the end of the day. Obviously, you would always have to have local people involved, but there are other ways of doing it to make sure that they are fully engaged, and I think that's key to it all. But quite frankly, at the end of the day, is we want to hear about what a suitable model is, and then that might be something that we can say, well, yeah, that sounds good, but we need that added in as well. And I think that's the time to make that decision.
So, suitable models of
management.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That we can engage with. I think we all agree on that.
Yeah, furthermore to that point, and it kind of ties in with that, I think there was a consensus as well that whilst we want to thank Sally and the other officers for the hard work they've already undertaken in achieving the significant cost savings they have, we also feel that we should take this opportunity to review the operating model that they've got there with a view to finding further cost savings and further increases in revenue. Because the report from 2015, and I took Sally's point, I didn't, for any stretch of the time, believe that 40 acres was just lying there barren. That wasn't what I thought at all. I know she was trying to clarify that at the end. But the report from 2015 contained within our report, when they got the consultant, stated parts of the farm are being underutilised and parts are not being utilised at all. Now, they said that there's little margin for increasing the possibility. However, those that were already in the report already identified possible increases in revenue to the tune of £6,000 or £7,000 per annum. So that was just by implementing the suggestions that were already in that report from 2015. So there are further opportunities out there for increasing revenues, both from the farming side of things, by upscaling some of the operations there and exploring other opportunities. They've already said they sell some of the pigs for bacon, whether that could be upscaled. They sell honey that they get from the bees. You know, there are plans for the orchard. So, you know, it's to have another review of the whole operating model to look at any possible other areas of...
But what you've got with the farm is some of the stuff missing from that operational model. Yeah. We, I think, as a committee saw that. It's not just about farming, but that's part of the major thing. We put the zebras to bed, didn't we, Ron? And I thought that your answer to your question was good. But it's about education, it's about farming, which is social services, volunteering. It's about a lot more. It's about ecology. It's buying into the local environment. There's a whole lot of things. Some of that was not emphasised at all on this report. And I had criticisms of that from elsewhere. And there's things they could be doing which, because certain people wrote this report, weren't emphasised. So reviewing the business model, which is really what you were talking about, and the operational strategy is what we're really talking about, and bringing everything in, because they will get revenue streams. I mean, like the caravan park and like bunkhouse ideas, which are new and innovative, maybe they've not even thought about it. Needs to be thrown in there and looked at what's viable and not viable.
I think that would be in proposals going forward. There's big plans like that they can't invest in at the moment.
I mean, but some of the things would be fairly low cost. Yeah. I mean, as Stuart would know from his allotments, things like a polytunnel, for example. We're not talking a massive capital outlay to get the polytunnel. They could do plants and they could sell on plants and turn it out, run a small garden type centre. And as the Chair said, there are more opportunities for them on the educational side, not just I focused more on the farming side, but we saw that yesterday from the educational side. There's more. There was only 2 lads there, one from Usk Agricultural College and one from Hartridge School. And we've identified that there is a gap there, that it's not that they're not doing it, but they need to perhaps widen the net and do a lot more of it. And is there an opportunity for them to generate more revenue from the educational provision side of things? That's something else to be looked at.
As I said about the social services, being involved with the special needs, children, to get them involved, because some don't need, education within a classroom, but they love it out working with animals and on the land.
And the other idea about farming the environment, which is what a lot of farmers are doing now, it's on the urban fringes. Why aren't they using their ability to do that, to work up with people like Andrew Neville to farm round to Vine? They've got the ability, they could get the new tractor out of that and equipment out of that, work with neighbourhood services to do so. Well, why aren't they doing that? And training volunteers, there's a lot more stuff they could do.
So then, finally, once the more detailed proposals are drawn up, I know you've mentioned it may well be a different committee, but that they are brought back to scrutiny for review before they are finalised.
Just to start on that point, Chair, said that. And part of the regeneration of the Lanarhaven Manor scheme, when they had the orchard planted, that was actually the young offenders that came in, and it was their hard work. So that lends itself to this kind of scenario as well, whether there was opportunities for works to be undertaken by young offenders at the farm.
So we keep this recommendation as relatively simple for this one.
I think that's where we're at.
Thank you very much, folks. Right, next thing on the agenda is the one that we've all declared an interest for, or not yet?
Yeah, sorry, members. So you'll see there you've got a list of member small schemes for the period the 25th of September to the 22nd of November. They're there just for you to note.
So We everybody okay with that?
And just to make sure that we do still have to declare it in the on the agenda.
Thank you, Nigel.
Yes.
Right. Who's moving?
Well, yes, and I'll second
Thank
it.
you.
And as I've said or I haven't said, it's been said. My name appears there somewhere or other to do with I think it does anyway. Yes, I can see it in there with this Gates thing, which I must admit I'd forgotten about. And what I tend to do generally is to read down through all of these things, and it amazes me sometimes what we have to declare interests in the short term, because of a serious illness of a person, and sadly that person passed away. I've had to step back into the Torvine Junior Football League as an administrator. And as we speak today, I still have that role, although it's going to change. So anything to do with football on here, I have to turn around and have some sort of an interest in, I suspect. So I do so openly.
You are all covered by your dispensations anyway. From
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much indeed. So that's off that one. Item for next meeting.
So the next meeting is scheduled for the 1st of February, and it's proposed with your agreement that it is the SRS collaboration.
Your favourite subject again? Don't bring your computers. So you got next item and the next date at next meeting. Yeah. Remember, there probably will be a joint sometime along there as well.
Yes.
That'll be the budget one. Yeah. Right. Well, thank you very much. That nice, crisp bit of scrutinising, and thank you for doing the meeting yesterday, which I think also.